start. All right, so welcome everyone to this event on role modeling in computing, and we're going to be focusing on questions such as who, what, how, and why, and particularly looking at higher education. My name is Virginia Grande. You can go with just Virginia, and my pronouns are she, they, so you can use either of those to refer to me. I'm a PhD student at the UpCERG Computing Education Research Group, and my focus is on role modeling. So you can imagine how glad I am that we got all these fantastic people here today to be talking about it. So I would like to open this event giving you some motivation on why we should be talking about this and how we can talk about role modeling. So if we start with why, and we look at the student's perspective, then we can see that it is beneficial for students to have role models, and particularly if they are members of underrepresented groups, because they can get higher motivation, they can get higher self-esteem or higher academic achievement. So there's clearly something positive about having a role model as a student. We can also look at it from the other perspective, which is those of us who can be perceived as role models. So that would be professionals, but also students themselves who can be imitated by the students around them. And so the kind of questions that we can have there, for example, are how we ourselves can be good role models, or how can we give visibility to those around us that could be role models for the people we have in our own context. So these are some of the examples of questions you could be wondering already from now, so that already inviting you to think about this in your own settings. But it is not so easy to think about role modeling, because role model is a concept that is quite loosely defined. So we all have some understanding of what it is, but then when it comes to the nuances, we can start seeing some differences that are relevant. And there are research studies where the results were quite affected by people understanding the concept in different ways. So we're gonna try to define it using research in this area. And we can talk about a role model as someone who represents an example of how to achieve a goal. I think this probably matches with the definition you had in your mind. And the way of achieving that goal is to look at this person and imitating them. And that's what we will traditionally refer to as a positive role model. But we can also have the approach of seeing this person as an example of something I don't want to become in order to achieve that goal. So something that I should avoid. For example, if I want to be healthy, then I will avoid being a person who smokes. That would be a negative role model. So while we're going through the event today, we're focusing on the positive view or the positive definition of a role model, but I think it's good to have in mind that there are more approaches to this. All right, so I said it's a representation of an example, but what kinds of representations are we talking about here today? So in my research, I talk about two types: an achievement, which is something externally given to the role model. So for example, an award or a title, a position, and something that is inherent to the role model that I call an aspect of this person, such as a behavior, a character trait, a competency, and so on. When we look at what they represent, this success, if we're talking about positive role models, needs to look like something we can actually achieve. Like either with time or effort, I can see myself becoming what this person represents. Otherwise, it can actually backfire and I have this person who demotivates me rather than helps me achieve my goal. And I mentioned that they are a concrete representation of something abstract, which I call embodiment. So if we put all of these things together, then a role model is a person who embodies, it's a concrete representation of something that it's seemingly attainable, and that's something, it's an achievement or an aspect that we're gonna imitate or avoid to help us achieve a goal. All right, so with these concepts in mind, we're gonna be talking about how role modeling is quite complex, and we'll do this in detail tomorrow. I will be doing my halftime seminar with Päivi Kinnunen from University of Helsinki as my external reviewer. Thank you so much, Päivi, for agreeing to do this. I really look forward to it. So it will be tomorrow in Swedish time in the morning with the same Zoom link that you have now. And we're going to be talking about several topics. In particular, I'm developing this framework to understand role modeling. that you can use for your different contexts, as I mentioned at the beginning. And for this particular context, I have the example of teachers in higher computing education and how they can experience being role models for their students. If we talk about other contexts, we'll talk about the effect of how these social contexts, cultures, and norms can affect role modeling, and you'll see a bit of that today as well. One can also look at ethical theories and how those can help us decide what to model and why, and many more topics. So I invite you to attend tomorrow if you have the chance. But I'm also bringing this up because I think this is one of the points for me today, to show that there's a lot of research in computing education that it is related to role modeling, or that you can maybe see your own research and try to find the role modeling approach to it. And I will be very interested to discuss that with you. Right, so today we'll have a series of presentations and a panel afterwards, and we're starting talking about teachers' competencies as a base for being a role model, where Phoebe will be presenting, talking about a multidimensional process model of teaching and how it can provide a framework where we can highlight and understand or discuss professional practices and teacher competencies, so that we can gain a better understanding and see how teachers can both be role models or act as such, and how they can be perceived as role models as well. And Phoebe will end with implications for teacher training related to this. And after this, we'll have a break, and then we'll continue with the competencies topic. We'll have Mats Daniels from Uppsala University, and he's going to be talking about how when we're thinking about creating learning environments, be that from an activity in a course to whole degree programs, how context and competencies are essential concepts to take into account. And so he'll describe a competency model that is aimed at designing education and how this is related to role modeling. After Mats, we'll have Anne-Catherine Peters. She's from KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology, and she's going to be talking about emotions in computing education. It is not so easy to find literature in computing education and engineering education that focuses on emotion. So Anne will describe what she has found in identity research and the literature around underrepresentation. And then she will continue to describe some work that she's doing now on certain emotions in computing and engineering education, which can be used to, as we've seen traditionally, to work for equality, but Anne argues also to contribute to sustainable development. And so speaking of equality, we move on to topics on gender, where we'll have Dr. Ella Taylor-Smith, who's from Edinburgh Napier University, and she's going to be presenting a framework that is the result of a collaboration across 3 Scottish universities. They were given this task of identifying initiatives that successfully use role models. And well, it's not so common to have a very scientific approach to this. So they developed this framework that you'll see as a checklist that helps people who are organizing these kind of initiatives to plan, have clear aims that they can share with their participants, have best practices, and so on. And this has a focus on gender and women in computing. The last presentation we'll have today talks about gender, but seeing is beyond the binary, where we'll have Max Skolodinsky from University of Oregon talking about his work, where he employs voices of non-binary and transgender individuals in computing, which usually don't get the visibility they should get in computer science education research. And so the goal is to understand these experiences and contribute to research to broaden participation, adding this perspective as well. One of the outcomes of this research, unfortunately, is this lack of representation and role models for transgender and gender nonconforming people in computer science education. So as you can see, quite a few different topics, and we'll get all of these speakers together for a relatively short panel. We'll have 30 minutes at the end of these presentations, and you're welcome to send questions to them. So just a few comments on how to do this. If you come up with a question during one of the presentations, you can send that to me through the private chat option in Zoom, so that I can bring your question up when we have the time for questions after that presentation. If we don't have time after the presentation, then maybe we can rephrase that question so that it's part of the panel discussion instead. And if you have questions for all the speakers as part of the panel discussion, you can also do so sending me a private message. I will remind you of this later, but we can use the chat option and I read your question, or you can raise your Zoom hand and we take turns for questions. We'll see. But we're really looking forward to getting some input from you. And with this, I think I give the word to Päivi.